being grounding with myself, with my multiple identities, and not feeling scared with the judgment of others, as long as I can truly speak my truth and just be who I am today. I think that's enough.
Welcome to the Young Changemakers podcast season 4. In this episode, we will be talking to inspiring young people from all around the world to explore how they are making a positive change in their communities. This podcast is a global Changemakers production. To learn more about how you can also make a difference, visit our website global-changemakers.net. Enjoy the episode.
Thank you so much, Yulia, for making the time to come talk to our listeners. We're really excited to have you talk to us about your organization, some of the work you've done after your experience with Global Changemakers in 2011. Let's start with just an introduction about what you've been up to since. I know you founded a couple youth organizations. Yeah, so give us a little bit of background about how everything's going.
Yes, thank you, Vinuri, for this time. I'm so glad that I can join this conversation because, yeah, as I told you before, my last time talking with Global Changemaker project and also some of the members or some of the staffs was quite a long time. So I started the Global Changemaker from the Asia Youth Summit in 2011. And then I was also become one of the facilitator in Global Youth Summit in 2013. Okay. So it will be 2013 perhaps, yeah.
Okay.
And I feel so excited to share about my experiences. So when I was joined the Global Changemaker, I think at that time I was struggling with the issues on how to provide a safe space for young people related to faith and sexuality, because back in 2010 there was quite incident, I can call it an incident, in which there was a clash between the so-called intolerant group with the LGBTI groups. There was a Asia conference, International Lesbian and Gay Conference, which was organized in one of the place in Indonesia, but then was protested by one of the radical groups, and then the conference was dismissed at that time. And from there, so it was a background of how the situation happened in 2010. And that's why I think at that same time I felt that I should make more space on that, because sometimes there was quite of the different groups. Like here there is a religious groups talking about religious issues, and then this is the LGBT groups that talks freely about sexuality. But what happens with the person who identify themselves as LGBTIQ, but also have connection with some of spirituality or religious view in this sense. So that's why I started there, to make a space for young people meaning 18 until 35 years old, because sometimes for trans people the age doesn't look like at the current adolescent age, because for some trans people they started to ready to accept themselves, and then to gather in one group to have a discussion with and to be open with the other person at the age of perhaps after 20 or 25 even. So that's why we expanded the definition of youth. And at that time, I was one of the initiator of the organization called YFOS, Youth Interfaith Forum on Sexuality. And yeah, basically we held camp. We called it as queer camp. It was like 5 days camp where people can discuss about their identity, that actually we have multiple identities. There is no single identity which is shaped by the dominant society, that you have to choose between Muslim or being trans or Christian or being lesbian or gay. So it seems like a very binary model, but in the camp we try to build a discussion that as a person we have so many identities, and that's why we need to discuss about that. And yeah, I think from there we started to have at least for the student, not for the people in each camp, and then from there they can have like their own group discussion or their own initiative if they want to. If not, it also totally fine, because perhaps it was also, I think most of them felt that it was their first space where they can talk freely about faith and sexuality at the same time. So if they want to have any project, it will be based on their comfortness in doing it. And I think now it has been six camp, I guess, because I am no longer the coordinator.
Mhm.
There is a limitation. So if you are already 30 years old, then it's time for you to step back from
Okay.
the organization. So yeah, I think since 2015, I am no longer the coordinator. And I guess the other journey that I have is that to start what I sent to you, the link, it is queer and feminist organization called Kubuka Tabu. Basically, it was initiated by me and other two colleagues, and we define ourselves as queer. From there, we try to build like a platform for all people to access the gender and sexuality content in Indonesian language. And also we have the online counseling services where people from all over the place in Indonesia can just send WhatsApp or just text if they want to share anything related to their problems. It could be about self-acceptance or the challenges when they face problems, if they want to come out to their parents or to their families, to their friends, and including the process of transitioning that are faced by the trans people.
Mhm.
So basically, this is what I do daily, but I know that I cannot just stick with one place usually. So during my work in at Kubuka Tabu, I also try to strengthen my capacity, especially related to the self-care and well-being aspect, because that is the thing that I missed, I guess, for the past 10 years, I guess. So maybe it is because of the situation that my older generation experienced, because in Indonesia we had like the dictatorship regime for 32 years from 1965 until 1998.
Mhm.
And when I accessed the feminist knowledge was from the older generation, and I think at that time they didn't know anything about self-care as the concept. So yeah, I don't blame them, but I guess it is now the other journey that I need to discover and unlearn from my activism for the past 10 years. So right now I'm also trying to figure out how to integrate the self-care into the activism, for example, through journaling, also through dancing. And I think one of the things that I also am now practicing is to do the TAT, tapas acupressure technique.
Okay.
Yeah, so yeah, it is still ongoing. It is still recent, still the last 3 years. But yeah, I feel I'm more connected compared to previous steps that I took in my activism. So that's what I also want to add in this. Sorry, a long introduction.
No, that's awesome. I mean, you've been doing, a lot of really great work for a really long time. And it's nice to see that as your almost like your journey in the activism space, starting with the Youth Interfaith Forum on Sexuality, then moving on
Mm,
to, I'm sorry if I don't say this right, but Kubo Tabu.
yeah, you say it
Um,
right.
Okay. Let's backtrack just to talk about backtracking to, your start into the space with the Youth Interfaith Forum on Sexuality. So you said it started off with this conference that happened in 2010 and the radical groups that were opposing, conversations about LGBTQ issues. How would you say, today in, almost 10, 11 years later, how has the conversation changed on this issue in
Mm.
Indonesia?
I think first it's changed a lot, I guess. So first, if I can trace back in the past 10 years, that some of the LGBT groups were still reluctant to talk about religious or spirituality as part of their discussion or programmatic project. Now there are so many LGBT groups who are open to talk about this issue specifically, because sometimes when it comes to faith and sexuality, it is quite not tangible. I mean, like in the sense of project management, what you want to achieve, what are the results, and so on. It is still difficult to assess whether you can achieve this result or not. And sometimes after you can achieve one result, then there was some backlash, like you need to have two or three step back, so I think first the focus of LGBT groups are getting vibrant in discussing this topic. They see that it is getting more and more important to discuss about this, because the fact is that you cannot segregate between the sexuality and faith in the daily conversation, I guess. And for the intolerant groups, I guess, because the political situation is also changing, and it's getting more authoritarianism, I guess, in Indonesia, including in Southeast Asia. Although you already said that there is democracy, but the authoritarianism are still happening there, even the flag of democracy. So in that case, I guess for some of the intolerant groups, there are already a step that the government take, for example, like banning this group. But unfortunately, the way that they are banning this group is also, for me, it also is inconstitutional. So on the other hand, there are authoritarianism where the group who claim themselves as because Indonesia is the majority of the Muslim population, right? And then there is the Islamic Party and also the Islamic mass organization. So they think that the current government is being unfair to them by banning the organization and so on, but including these intolerant groups.
So just to clarify, they're banning the LGBTQ groups or the intolerant groups?
They're banning the intolerant groups,
okay.
But also in the same time, not in the same year, but perhaps, so the banning occurred in 2018 or 19. But for the LGBT groups, there was also like the moral panic in Indonesia in 2016, where I think from there the LGBT groups could not also, for example, march in the public space, because usually we went to the car-free day, for example, to just join the march, conducted the public event, the rally, and so on. But since 2016, there was no public rally or public march anymore because of the situation. So the government also, because this moral panic came from different actors, including the government at that time, by saying public hate comment to the LGBT groups, and it was then echoed by the other ministry and other mayor in different cities, including some of the media and psychiatric institution also raised that it was not good to become LGBT. And there was also then become a momentum where the LGBT group felt we need more strategy, like not going to public, especially after the COVID, right? It has become difficult as well to have the public assembly and so on. So I think from both sides, there was a difficult situation. I mean, yes, some of the intolerant group was banned, and also they were restricted in their movement. But on the other hand, the LGBT groups also experience difficulties in having the public event, for example.
So it's almost like there's been some progress, but there's also been backlash to that progress from the political side. I'm also curious, since you spoke a lot about the politics of the LGBTQ issues, what do you see the progress in terms of like the social aspect? Are more people, because of these groups, because these conversations are happening, do you feel like more people, at least, maybe within the younger population, are more accepting, they know more, and like maybe some of that intolerance, or sometimes intolerance because of ignorance or not fully understanding what it means to be LGBTQ, is getting better?
Yeah, I guess from my view, the younger generation are getting more curious about these issues. It could be the LGBT issue, LGBT topics as the way to understand the human diversity or even as the movement. And it is good to know, for example, like some of the bands also openly promoted and support the diversity in their concert. They also raise these issues, and I think it is also because there are more awareness related to the sexual violence, I guess. So I think from 2016, the youth groups and also the women's group also are fighting for the sexual violence bill to be happening in Indonesia, because in Indonesia we don't have that regulation yet. But the fact that we can see that the severe situation happen, for example, like the sexual harassment in the street, or the forced marriage occur in the personal setting. And I think those awareness also link that when we're talking about the sexual violence or violence, it doesn't apply, it is not only applied to the heterosexual person, but also to the non-heterosexual. I guess from there, people are more aware that we cannot do harm and we cannot do violence to all people, including the LGBTIQ people. So in that sense, I guess, even for example, even you hate them, even you don't agree, or you don't agree with their identity, it doesn't mean that you have to harm them. So I guess that is a good thing to highlight, and to also start the discussion with the younger generation on how to respect each other, and how to, or even to step up when you know that someone is violated, also being discriminated against.
On the topic of faith and sexuality, have you seen any movement in Indonesia from religious organizations that are now talking about these topics in their respective communities? Or is it mostly young people and organizations separate outside of the religious realm that are trying to bring these topics to the forefront?
I think there was a letter, I think, made by one of the biggest like church union in Indonesia in responding that you cannot do harm to LGBT groups. So there is that statement, but yeah, I know there has been a controversy afterward. So because the letter was distributed by the union, but when it comes to the church by church policy, it will be depend on different culture and also awareness in that institutional setting. But I guess it was good to have that statement that you cannot discriminate against the LGBT in general. And for the Muslim community, I guess we don't have that statement from the religious leaders in the top of the institution. But there has been like the alternative movement that pushed by NGOs who has been working in Islam and gender for the past 20 years. Mostly they work on reproductive health with girls, because that's become the challenges if it comes to speaking about the not so we haven't they haven't reached the discussion on sexuality yet, but they are discussing about how to be, for example, aware with your body, with your genders, and the discussion are still there, and has been discussed since 20 years ago. But there are also several LGBT individuals that define themselves as Muslim and also LGBT, who are building this bridge with this organization. So, for example, there are some of trans activists who are usually based in pesantren in the Islamic boarding school, and then they build the connection with the local kiai or the local religious leaders to speak about how Islam sees transgender, for example, especially when it comes to the religious practice, whether it is okay if they use different attributes, because for example, in Islam, there is certain attributes that you have to wear if you identify yourself as female or male. There are space to be negotiated about that. Yeah, I think more and more LGBTIQ individuals started to speak about the spirituality as part of their life. So it is also good to bring the awareness and discussion with the other peers around that. And I guess in my role, for example, as a person who started the discussion on faith and sexuality like 10 years ago, and now I also discover that it is important to for me to also bring up this issue. Yeah, I also try to, for example, make like some of the digital storytelling about my experience as the queer Muslim woman, because it is not easy to discuss and to share your personal journey, especially if it relates to your your struggle as the Muslim and also as a queer person. So I think there are some also religious figures that they don't say it publicly their stance, but they keep building the community within the Islamic communities, because it is also about the strategy how to be secure, because it is also about the security, about the safety, and sometimes also about the trust from the people to this figure, and they have to make some of the steps to gradually introduce understanding that about gender and sexuality to their audience. Yeah, I mean, more and more religious leader and figures are open to speak about this real situation of and the living and many of LGBTIQ people also are more open to speak about their life experience.
Right.
Hi there! We hope you're enjoying the episode so far. At Global Changemakers, we support youth to create a positive change towards more inclusive, fair, and sustainable communities. We do this by providing skills development, capacity building, mentoring, and grants. Head to our website, global-changemakers.net, to join our programs and use our resources. Now on with the rest of the episode.
Yeah, I mean, that's really positive, I think, to start hearing, religious leaders talk about these issues, because, obviously the religion piece for a lot of people is difficult to understand and comprehend, and not feeling accepted, while it might also be difficult to feel acceptance of yourself with your family. You add all of that to the religious piece. So I definitely think that seems like there's definitely progress being made in Indonesia with religious leaders talking about these issues. You mentioned a little bit about your own personal journey. I'm kind of curious, if you don't mind sharing, how was that kind of coming to that identity, but also making peace or accepting yourself in that process? Anything you're willing to share that can, maybe help someone who's going through something similar, or just how you dealt with it.
Yeah, actually, you can also see the process of the digital storytelling in the website. It is published in CSBR links, Coalition on Sexual and Bodily Rights for Muslim Societies. It is the process that I put in the form of voices, images in the digital storytelling. And yeah, and feel free to comment there, and also to share it to other people that you think maybe also relate with that experiences. And from my side, I can share that focusing on in Muslim society since senior high school. And then I was very involved in that community, in the Muslim community. And at that time, I was not aware yet about my sexuality as a queer person at that time. And I felt that I was so connected with this Muslim community when I was in senior high school, because from there I can learn so many things. I can learn about how to do the community building, how to be not selfish with ourselves, to give what we can do to others. And then so I felt so happy to be part of this community. But then when I was still in that community, I felt that another situation, which was about my sexual orientation. And at that time, it was difficult to discuss about diverse sexual orientation because people will just share about, so what are your crush, which boy that you like, but I
Yeah.
didn't feel like that at all.
Mhm.
So on one hand, I felt so connected with this community, but on the other hand, I could not tell about my
Relate, or
desire.
you couldn't like be a part of those conversations.
So that's why then I decided to just step back from this community and seek for other information. And that's where I figure out some of the LGBT groups who are openly talk about sexuality, about sexual pleasure and so on.
Mhm.
But then I was also feeling a little bit isolated when it comes to the discussion of spirituality, for example, because when I ask about the question about how do you feel about God, they will say nothing. So
Mhm.
my feeling of exclusion was same
Right.
with while I was in senior high school, when I couldn't express my experience. For example, when I like a girl at that time, so I felt excluded in a way. But then I also understand that the feel I craving a lot with the sense of community that I initially had with the Muslim community, in which I always bring it wherever I go,
Mm-hmm.
where I talk with my LGBT group, my LGBT people, my LGBT friends. I never, I always want to build a community.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot be. That's why some of the initiatives that I do will be mostly co-initiative by someone else. So I am not the only founding member. And I think the root came from the sense of being a Muslim community when I was
Right.
in senior high school. So that's why when it comes to the acceptance of myself as the Muslim and also queer person is from there. When I continue my journey as the activist, as the community organizer, that's the same thing that never changed from my youth until this time right now. And I think the sense of community came from my understanding of that religion is a communal process,
Mm-hmm.
not the individual process. And that's why the energy makes me feel that I need to be involved in group,
Right.
not necessarily by myself. The other thing is that when I was in UK, so I got a good experience on how accepting the Muslim community in UK was.
Mm-hmm.
So I took the study on gender and sexuality, and I took one course about religion and gender. And there was a discussion about the embodied tafsir. So embodied tafsir is a concept that is produced by one of the Muslim scholar from South Africa, which basically said about the importance of looking into your body as a way to interpret the sacred text, because somehow when it comes to the interpretation of the text, it always our embodied experience never counted, especially when it comes to the women's body or of course the
It's almost
transgender
like
body.
you're looking internally and then trying to identify the text with your own experience and like what's
Mm,
around you, instead of looking at
mm,
the text like separate to what's going on in the world or
mm,
what's going on with you. That's a
mm,
really
mm,
interesting
mm.
take, which
Yeah,
I really love
yeah,
that. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. That's why when it comes to that concept with the embodied tafsir,
Mhm.
I feel that yes, this is what I have been going through in my life. Like, for example, queer person always go back into their own body, right? To their own embodiment practices, their embodiment experiences, but do their experience count it as part of the way to interpret or understand the religious text and so on?
Mhm.
Yeah, sometimes it is based on who interpret the text, right? Yeah, from there I felt more connected with this feel that. So that's one thing. And then the second thing, I also joined the inclusive mosque initiative in UK.
Mhm.
So it is not a mosque, but it's a community who has the future dreams of having an inclusive mosque. So the activities were like praying together, and then sharing after the prayer and so on. And it was a good thing to know that everyone is welcome into the prayers, even if you you are still reluctant to do the prayers. You just can sit somewhere and just observe.
And be
So
a
there
part of
is
the community.
and be present in your own way. So it was very enlightening. And it makes me, when I went back to Indonesia, and it made me become more assured that there is a space and there is a way to start to experiencing the religious practice or spiritual practice in many ways, so not in a single way. So that's why I feel, so I think if I can relate it to my self-care and well-being practices, it also relates. So I don't practice literally like the Muslim practice now, but I feel that I'm also taking that journey through my self-care practices. I don't know the destination. I don't expect the result, but I think this is the process that I am doing by being grounding with myself, with my multiple identities, and not feeling scared with the judgment of others, as long as I can truly speak my truth and just be who I am today. I think that's enough. So I think those are some insight and some sharing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really beautiful. The first person who has to accept who you are is yourself. And I think, realizing that for lots of people takes a long time, and finding ways to do that, and then looking to community, and eventually finding acceptance in those spaces as well. I think it's really beautiful that you talk about community. And then one of the things you mentioned was the queer camps that you did as part of the Youth Interfaith Forum. You were part of creating that space for a lot of young people. What were some of your insights or takeaways that you got from those camps that you felt like people or young people were going through or having trouble talking about or identifying with?
Yes, I think some of the key takeaways that I got from these young people were, first, it's about accepting yourself, because I guess many of the years they are struggling a lot to accept themselves, because all of the people surrounded that they're surrounded by never believe or always dismiss their true identity. So that's one key thing. When they finally can have the space to share about anything without judgment, without fearing that someone will cut your statement and then blame you. That is one key thing that the young people felt, I guess, at that time. So being accepted. And also from there, they don't feel too afraid when they started to reach out another friends who also feel the same experience like them, because sometimes fear can make us stop to do something that we are passionate about. But it doesn't mean that the fear disappear. The fear is still there. They still feel afraid of something, because we need to think about the security, who we are speaking with, and what kind of the message that we are delivering. So they are also thinking about that. So it doesn't mean that there's no fear, but at least they know that it is okay just to speak out